Hello everybody, in this video, I wanted to add sprinting and crouching to my Rigidbody player controller, and I also wanted to address some of the comments that I got on that video. So the first comment that I wanted to address was this one that told me that I should be normalizing my input before I apply it to the player, and that totally makes sense because if you are going diagonally, then you shouldn't be moving any faster than if you were going straight. But this is actually already accounted for by our player input here. If we open up our input actions asset, we can see that our input is actually set to digital normalized. So if you don't have that enabled, then you want to open your input actions and make sure that it's on digital normalized, and that will normalize your input for you. The next thing that I wanted to address was this comment saying that I should turn off my rotation whenever I have UI open, and that's another thing that my player input already does for us. As long as you have this auto switch checkbox checked, then you can see in the input there's two action maps, one for UI and one for player. Whenever UI gets triggered, then it will turn off my player action map, and that will stop my player from rotating. So with that said, let's start adding some sprinting and crouching to our player. First thing is sprinting. So for that, I'll open up my player controller script. I'll add another float for sprint speed. I'll add a private bool called isSprinting. And I'll copy one of these input methods down and switch it to onSprint. And inside I'll set isSprinting equal to context.read value as button, which will set our isSprinting bool based on if we have our sprinting button pressed. Now down in our move method here, instead of just multiplying by speed, I want to check if we are sprinting, so isSprinting. And if we are sprinting, then I want to use my sprint speed, otherwise we'll just use speed. Now back in Unity, I'll set my sprint speed to something like double my original speed, so 8. And in our player input actions, I'm going to need to add a new binding here for sprint. And I'm going to bind it to left shift. And just click this checkbox and save the asset. Now under our events player, I'm going to add my player controller script into the sprint, and I'm going to select on sprint. Now if I hit play, you can see I can walk around like I could before, but if I hold the shift key, then I sprint and I go faster than I normally would. The next thing I want to add is crouching so that I can fit under this box here. And the way to do that for me is usually with the animator component. So I'm going to use that. I'll just click add component, animator. And this needs an animator controller. So go to Window, Animation, and Animation. And I'm just going to put mine down here. Select your player and hit Create. I'm going to put an animation for crouching. Hit this little record button so it records all of the changes you make. And I'm just going to put my player into a crouched state. So I'm going to select my capsule collider. I'm going to shrink it down to something like 1.5. Put it to negative 0.25 on the y-axis. And that moved that part down. Now I want to move my camera down so that I know I'm crouched. So I'll just select my camera holder and put it to 0.25 on the y-axis. Then I'll create a new clip for standing. Hit the record button again. And I'm gonna make sure that it records my height as 2, the center as 0, and I'm gonna select my camera holder again and make its height 0.5. So now I just want to take my player, and I wanted to remove these two components here, the mesh render and the mesh filter, because you can't see them from first person anyways. So if we take a look at this animation, standing puts us like this, and crouching will shrink us down to this kind of crouched position, and standing brings us back up to full height. So now we're going to open up the controller here by double-clicking on it. And by default, I want to be standing, so I'm going to make this the layer default state. And then I'm going to make a transition from standing to crouching and from crouching back to standing. I'm going to add a new parameter here by clicking on the parameters tab, and I'm going to add a bool called isCrouching. And I'm going to click on the transition here. I want to start crouching if isCrouching is true, and I want to go back to standing if isCrouching is false. I'm just going to remove exit time from both of these transitions, and if you want to make the transition go faster, you can adjust this time in between here. I'm just going to move it back a little bit. Let's see, transition duration, I'm going to put to something like 0.1 both ways. Now back on our player, we're going to need a binding for crouching, so open your input actions, press the plus button. I'm going to call mine crouch, and I'm going to bind it to left control. Click on the keyboard and mouse checkbox and save the asset. Now I'm going to double click on my player controller script to open it up. I'm going to do basically the same thing as the sprinting, so I'm going to make a new bool for isCrouching. And I'm going to just duplicate this method here down, change it to onCrouch, and set isCrouching to read value as button. Then in my update method, which I don't have yet, so I'll just go private void update, and it auto-completed it for me. And in our update method, I just want to grab a reference to our animator component, so public animator anim. And in our update method, I'll just say anim.setBool, and we called that boolean isCrouching, and we'll set it to isCrouching. Now back in Unity, I need to go to my player input component. Under events player, I'll add a new slot for crouch, drag in my player controller script, and I'll put in onCrouch. So if I did everything right, hopefully when I press play here, and I press control, I need to make sure to drag in my animator component, and now if I press play, if I press control, you can see I go down, and if I let go, I go up. So hopefully now if I go up to this box here, I can press control to fit under it, that I couldn't do before. And one more thing I wanted to add to this was slowing down when you press control, because right now I can still sprint while crouching, and that's probably not what you want for your game. So to fix that, in my player controller script, I'm going to add a new float here for my crouch speed. And down where I set my target velocity, I'm going to wrap this in brackets. And I'm going to say, is crouching. If I'm crouching, then I want to use my crouch speed. Otherwise, I'll check if I'm sprinting and use the according speed. That should be all we need for that, so I'm going to just set my crouch speed to something like 1, so you can really see that we're slowing down. And now if I crouch, I go really slow. It doesn't matter if I'm sprinting or not. And if I'm standing and I sprint, I can go faster. Now the last thing I wanted to add to this was an improvement to our jumping, because right now it just adds to your velocity instead of setting it. So you get different jump speeds depending on how fast you're going downwards, which is a little bit annoying and it feels a bit out of control. Okay, so to fix that, I'm going to open up my player controller script, and down in the jump method here, instead of adding force, what I want to do is set rb.velocity equal to jump forces. But instead of setting this to 0, I'm going to want to set it to rb.velocity. And I'm going to set jump forces.y equal to jump force. So if you move your jump force up to something like 6, then if you press play, you'll see that we can jump, and no matter what velocity I have, I still jump to the same height. So even on this trampoline, then I can still jump high. And no matter if I'm falling fast or not, I can still jump at the same speed, which feels a lot more controlled and better. So if there's anything else you want me to add to this player controller, then make sure to let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I would appreciate your subscription, and I'll see you later.